To start the conversation, Nitya, I would actually like to start with you. And since you're majorly from the VC side, want to know how does a founder go from being, an operator to a CEO, and what are the core differences in mindset overall that you have seen, let's say from a pre-seed company to a matured company that is already pre-series A or post-series A? What is the difference that you have seen entirely in an ecosystem, let's say from industry to industry or from a different sector purview?
No, I was saying this is, a very fantastic question to ask. We're an early stage investor. We invest in companies from seed all the way up to Series B. And, we see these journeys over a period of 10 to 12 years. And, when this question was asked to me a few times over, we were trying to look and answer this question from a data perspective as well within our portfolio, right? And there were 2-3 trends that kind of stood out for us. I think at seed, pre-seed, which is when we come in to make our bread and butter, we see founders hustling a lot, stitching together a lot of things and doing a lot on their own. So there's obviously a lot on their table. And, we also encourage founders to, from day one, start thinking about, an L2 and an L1 levels of leadership that kind of move up the ladder as the business scales up. I think one massive difference that kind of flows in, once company matures, let's say beyond a 10 crore scale, is also how, some of these founders navigate, leadership hiring, leadership talent, and just building the org beneath them. I think the second core insight for us has been that, as companies mature from, being a seed Series A startup, and, these terms are, at least if you ask me, they're very loosely defined, but, for the purpose of this conversation, right, let's say sub 5 to 10 CR and beyond 10 CR is also, we've seen a lot of founders get very, very deep with their data, understand their core customer, and I think it is between that 5 to 10 crore sort of a mark when we start seeing a lot of founders, build a lot of discipline around data in their organization, and this only scales up over a period of time. And lastly, our one of the things that, I've observed personally while investing in companies is that at pre-seed seed, there are a lot of unknowns, and that means that, there's always an anxiety or a survival risk. I think at beyond Series A, there's a lot of confidence that sort of flows in. So your ability to go to market is one benchmark, but I think especially in consumer, a lot of founders beyond the 10 to 15 crore scale build the muscle not only to launch products but also kill products quickly, and I think that's very, very critical, especially from a consumer product standpoint.
Please. Thanks for that. Since we spoke on product and you all being majorly from the D2C and from the renewable side, wanted to know what would be the strategic pivot that you all have taken when it comes to basically the marketing part, let's say post PMF, or when it's basically trying to scale or hyper scale from 1 to 10. What would be the difference, or what is the change that you all have seen within that time?
Hello. If you don't mind, I'll just sort of add to what Nitya said on the founder and the CEO bit. Assuming your question was that, how does the same person switch between being a founder and a CEO? So I think a few things, and this is something which is very relevant, very personal to me. I think being founder is more of an emotion, more of an energy. Being a CEO is more of living up to that energy and designation. When you're in office, you're largely, or rather, I would say founder largely will set the vision, where you need to be. And the CEO sort of, drives that mission to reach to that vision. When you're in office, you're largely a CEO. When you're home, you're always a founder. You think, you are a problem identifier. As a CEO, you sort of try to be a problem solver. As a founder, I think you need to have a very high level of EQ. It should sort of supersede IQ, because there are problems which you need to really think about deeply. As a CEO, you tend to largely be more commercial, more IQ driven, more than EQ. And this is, again, I'm talking about the same person doing both the roles. So it's two sides of the same coin. Now the next question, sorry. You said about the pivot.
Strategic pivot.
See, I think that would be a very, it would differ from business to business, founder to founder, category to category, and in the way in which the business or the modality of the business exists. For me especially, having run a bootstrap brand for nearly 9 years, we saw our pivot. So we always had a hand to mouth situation when it came to capital, and while I was building a watch brand, being a bootstrapped business, I had a lot of good friends who were naysayers saying that this is only for the big boys. Don't see small brands or startups coming in cracking the analog watch industry. Largely because of the fact that the minimum operating quantity for, just for you to sort of launch 20 to 30, 40 styles would sort of go tending towards a crore. I didn't have that bit of capital. So we sort of did whatever we did, hustled through. And after we got our PMF, product market fit, we did stay very lean. We never had a team more, or rather, for the first 4 years, we had a team in single digit doing everything and everything. And the only one key pivot was that I got a small debt, which I sort of put the entire amount in, in what we believed would do well, which was our own designed watches. Prior to that, we were sort of picking up styles and products from the market the first 3 years. And I think that's what we did, and we never looked back. Consumers started thinking of us as a proper brand, with a lot of other things in the periphery, marketing, communications, trying to build community around some good content on Instagram. So I think that's been our pivot.
Hi guys, I just wanted to understand the audience a little better. So, is everyone a founder here, or who all are founders?
Most of them are all founders of it.
Got it. So usually we have, I think the first thing of any brand building is know your audience, right? So I think for us, initially, Beco is a 5-year-old brand. We are almost about touching 100 crores. And I remember the journey from 0 to 10, from 10 to 50 and 50 to 100 looked very, very, very different. I think initially the mindset was always more of a dhanda mindset, right? Where you don't have any demand. कोई आपको जानता नहीं है, अभी भी कोई नहीं जानता, but back then no one really knows you in the ecosystem as an enabler, service provider, as a product guy. So no one really knows what your startup does, what your brand does, why is it relevant to the consumer. So I think initially you have to build that dhanda mindset कि पैसे कहाँ से आ रहे हैं, sales कहाँ पर होगा. I think the strategic pivot that Siddarth spoke about, it's more to do with brand creation. You need people to talk about your brand either through word of mouth, or you need to induce either through community building, through strong. So largely, we've hired a lot of folks from Unilever, from Procter, Godrej, Marico. And one thing that I've learned the hard way is that if you don't spend and you don't take that leap of faith in terms of branding and advertising, a large part of your game will still continue to be the same. You'll still think of how do I push the product. So you need to have an element of pull, and that consumer pull only comes with certain time. So it's like a child. वो 9 महीने के पहले वो पैदा नहीं होगा. So it takes a due time. You can short circuit it to some extent, but almost always you'll run discounts or you'll run advertising that might not eventually lead to an optimized way. So we've actually invested a lot of capital into brand building, and still I would say that the majority of the audience might not even know the kind of brands that are present in the industry, and which makes you think of a more deeper question, that how do you really go through the brand building process, the kind of brands that you build, and how do you be consistent with not seeing that pull in the early days, but still being consistent to do that over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. So I think moving more from a push to always focus a part of your investments, not just on performance, but also on your top funnel and build awareness for your brand.
So Nanda, to get you in over here, since here we are speaking about hypergrowth, strategic pivot and all, in terms of market automation, I think so that is something that we all want to understand and deep dive more when it comes to not only scaling the top line, but also the bottom line at that point in time, and even the analytic part for a D2C brand, or let's say not only renewables, but something like a marketplace would also want to use. So as a catalyst, where does this stand in terms of helping company understand the market more, let's say, which is untapped or something that is already matured, but there would be some of the other loophole where the organization can actually grow. Basically, every startup that actually has come in is basically coming in the no entry way and trying to build in from there. So how would this actually benefit on the long term?
Sure, thanks for that. So I think it was actually good to hear two different perspectives, mainly from a bootstrap story and a scale that you have seen over the recent past and the emphasis on brand building. So because Netcore, it's a 25-year-old brand, we've been working with many D2C e-commerce players over a period of time, because of which we have a collective intelligence of understanding to some extent what are some of the analytical gaps that are out there, especially that are required when a founder is growing from 0 to 1 versus 1 to 10. And at the same time, I think what we have started to see, right, especially like in the initial days, in fact, we are working with few startups who are still dependent on agencies for scaling their growth, right? And there is a substantial difference between like when you are driving and invested in the brand building versus you are dependent on an agency who are also working with few other brands to scale their brand and scale their growth, right? So which is where, so we have this concept called inbox commerce, which is picking up, I think, WhatsApp as this concept called WhatsApp commerce, where because we are all losing attention, because of channel recession, attention recession, it is very critical for someone, to hold an attention in a single interface, which is where Netcore was OGs in the space of email and SMS marketing. So today, we try to see how we can, optimize a specific channel that is critical for different brands. Like for example, if I am right, Beco, I'm assuming most of your users would spend a lot of time on social versus probably like, email or SMS. On the contrary, I assume the type of users you may have would be more curious to probably get to know updates about the products on email as a channel. Not really? Okay. They are Instagram addicts. Most of us are into this time. Sure. So we are working with some of the jewelry and apparel brands where we try to see how do we get, exactly understand where the attention of the users are and try to get the commerce element within the channel. That way we optimize the growth of, let's say, a specific brand across the channel. So which is where Netcore comes in to understand the preference, the channel preference. We give the analytics intelligence so that you can start to segment your users depending on their behaviors, depending on their interactions to your brand across different channels. But at the same time, have the intelligence in a single platform. That way you can then cater relevant communication across the channels where they would need. So that's where Netcore's intelligence comes into picture, where we work with brands and marketing teams very closely to drive these interactions.
So I'll leave a question actually open for all of you all. Nitya, you especially on the VC side, and let's say with regards to you now, touching 100 crores, we see a lot of culture change, like you mentioned. Now you're hiring people from MNCs like P&G, etc., or companies that are bootstrapped that are just moving in and now creating brands that are, it's very much there into the market. So my question is twofold. One is, what is the culture change that you all have seen and how important it is to drive that culture? Because in a high growth company, you have got seasoned employees to even, you can say, freshers or your high-end intellects that actually come in from various B schools and who have got a different thought process. So their entire understanding, like you said, you all use Instagram. During my days, Instagram was not known. It was purely SMS or pure calling that would actually do. Or like my father said, we used to stand below the building and see which are all the companies, and then we used to go over there. So how important it is to maintain your core, but understand the new league that you actually need to get in, and then look at the scale going on top over there. So I leave the floor to either one of you all to answer it.
See, I think the most fun and जो एक्चुअल में मज़ा है वो स्टार्टिंग में ही आता है. आफ्टर दैट a lot of the things actually evolve and change for the better, and the kind of organization that you, they say, right, what you got you here won't get you there. And I think that change is very important, because while the hustle mindset needs to be on, there has to be a lot of processes, systems. A lot of them actually are very boring, because they have to do the same thing consistently over a period of time. I think we are still struggling with that cultural change, because initially we had, I've read that book, The Netflix Culture, where the CEO Ryan talks about how he built the culture at Netflix, the co-founder. And we also had a no open policy where there are no leaves, there are no holidays, people can do what's important to them as long as they're getting work done. But as we've grown into an organization of about 120 members, we've seen that some of these systems don't work anymore. And while trust is important, I think it needs to be shown in different ways. So, like I said, like we've all struggled with it. I think for the founders who are going through it or have already gone through it, it also shakes a lot of your oldest team members and investors, because you've operated in a certain way, but now you need to operate in a very different way. But I feel like the most important thing is, as long as the purpose of the company is not lost, then I think some of these things will keep on changing. And as long as they're delivering the right results in the right way, all of this is almost a part and parcel of building a company, because what you are doing on your high is as important as what you're doing on your low. And I think the learning has been immense from there. My only thought here is that I think cultural change is very, very important. But as long as the purpose of the organization, which I think most people lose out, and you lose out on your old team members. So what really built the organization the foundation should be very strong.
Yeah, no, I think, that's a very good perspective. And I always say that, you always learn more from an operator than you will ever from an investor. And, before we started, I was telling this to Aditya, that, in my humble opinion, he spent 5 years solving a problem. I've probably met him 6 times, right? But, over the last few years that, I've had the privilege of being an investor, I'll take this question in, a few parts, right? We've seen businesses become unicorn. We've also seen, unfortunately, a lot of businesses that didn't make it. And there's always a thought process, right? Like as an investor also, do you think that, was it the founder, was it the market, was it the product, was it the timing, right? And in a lot of cases, and, I want to kind of twist this question to say, what leads to a winning culture, or, what leads to a win in a market? And one thing that I've seen that consistently play out is, and it's a very old quote, and, I almost don't want to say it, but honestly, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? But to his point, right, culture needs to evolve with every stage of the business that you are in. And it's also a function of 3 things, right? One is your vision. Your vision is going to change every 2 years. What you go to solve for is going to change every 5 years. That means as a founder and the team that you build below you, it's very important that, everybody is bought into a mission. And when I say they're bought into a mission, it's not something that's intangible, right? It has to be very, very outcome oriented. So with respect to the teams that we saw make it, we saw very early obsession with metrics, we saw very early obsession with outcomes, and we saw a lot of early obsession with making people accountable, giving them a free rein, and giving them their own ropes to learn. So that's fundamentally one part of it with respect to how it's, let's say, played out at a 10,000 feet level. Then the question more is that how do you build this org up, right? And to me, the greatest learning curve has been that, build it in your hiring process. So spend a lot of, even if you have to do 2 additional interviews, even if you have to bring a whole room in to meet, let's say your L1, L2 hired, you have to get your investors' perspective and put in that work. Because, hiring, especially across your L1 and L2, is not an employee sort of a relation. It's almost bringing a new member into your family, how you would bring in a child into the family, or how you would bring in a daughter-in-law. So it's very important that, whoever is coming in is excited, oriented, and expectation-wise realistically set in to kind of come in and deliver, because, this is like the 0 to 1 journey, of course, is hard, but the 1 to 10 journey is even harder. So, that's been something that I've learned along this privileged journey is to, be extremely vision oriented. And, as a founder, I think it becomes very important to constantly iterate and reiterate what you're solving for and what each member in the team is contributing to it, right? So how does it become tangible for Nitya as an employee at a company to know that my work leads to something? That I think that visualization for anyone is very important to kind of, make it, if you ask me.
So on that note, actually, a question both of y'all would be is how does a risk tolerance, the entire tolerance towards risk change, and the acceptance to capital, or you can say newer markets, how does that overall impact y'all as an organization?
Acceptance too.
Of risk, because culture changes, the overall risk changes, market dynamics changes, everything comes out over there. Newer faces, internal, external. So how would that be entirely different for you all?
So again, culture change might not really be a risk of some kind, but again, I think let's disassociate from the cultural nuance. See, risk is a very subjective thing, right? And it becomes a reward when it becomes objective. And I believe most of the founders would agree with me that it's only when you take whatever risk in whatever proportion, which I would say measured risk, and it gives you a yield and you measure it back, and then you look at the throughput, it makes sense for you, you say repeat that cycle, right? In a bigger scale, in a little more riskier way, but sort of have something to hedge it. So now the hedge for every business could be very different. For example, a simple thing what we did in a very initial bootstrapped early days, we used to run a lot of marketing not on the credit line. In fact, we didn't have a credit line at that point of time. So on Facebook, these are years when Instagram had not really sort of come in. So you were supposed to recharge your own account, and marketing is a pre-factor spend. If it doesn't work, you're sort of doomed, right? I had whatever cards I had, so I started running all the ads through my cards. I had a certain credit cycle. I knew by the time my payments will hit back to my account, I'll be able to pay my cards back. I did that so methodically, so efficiently, that till date, I do that, right? I sometimes use my corporate card, but I still use, as it in the capacity of a director, my cards, and God knows how many points I have. That's a different, different bit to it. But that's just one of the things, right? That I was able to sort of hedge a certain bold move by having a cash flow instrument which was not owned by the company.
So on a lighter note, Nanda, how can we help ourselves by not swiping our cards that much and benefiting more and get marketed entirely out over there?
That's actually an interesting point. So, in fact, I'm sure like every founder here would think about, hey, should we run ads, to drive that additional growth, right? Like, and we're working with some of the brands like, who are very, conservative about like how they want to look at investing in a specific channel. And Meta is we work with WhatsApp is our partner with Netcore, and as we every brand is very different. Like some of the D2C brands prefer to have hyper growth by investing in ads, while I'm sure brands that have grown beyond 1 to 10 still want to continue invest on that ads, probably not for conversions, but just to increase the brand recall and have the attention of the users to actually not get diluted, right? Like, and which is where we work with brands to see, let's say, once a user is landed on a specific channel, and it could be WhatsApp, it could be SMS, it could be email, and once they are onto your Shopify as a website or email as a channel, then how do we get your user to spend more time with you on that channel? That way, we try to not get brands shell a lot of money on advertisements, etc. So that's where we come in to get that intelligence to the brands and optimize across channels.
Before I go into another monologue, I would request audience any questions so far, anything that comes to your mind, you're free to ask.
So beyond capital, of course, you've helped them with the funds, but especially your portfolio currently in the D2C consumer space, what else have you seen they need support with?
That's actually a very good question. And, for most of you who don't know 314, we're an early stage fund. And we started out in 2016. I joined the fund in 2019. And I was a very early employee in the team, and most of us were under 30. And if any of you have spoken to VCs, you will know that's a rarity because, most people come into this industry with their hair grayed. And we wanted to do venture very differently. We wanted to have a very fresh attempt as to how we do venture in India, right? And one of the early learnings that we had was that, over a period of time, and when we started out 314, there weren't as many venture funds in the country today that we have today, and it's a great thing for the ecosystem. But we realized that very soon we realized that capital is going to be a commodity, and in a business like ours, it's very important that we do things right. We're there for the companies that we invest in, and it is even more critical for the stage that we come in at. So over the last few years, what we've done is we've learned, relearned, and we've rebuilt ourselves as a startup every 2 years. And what that means is that today only 1/3 of our team does investing, for instance, and we've built 2/3 of our capability in our team towards supporting our portfolio. So very intently, very methodologically, we've gone back to our founders, we've had qualitative conversations, we've rolled out surveys to actually understand, what startups lean towards us for. And when we are onboarding a new company, especially at a seed or a Series A stage, where is it that, that we need more support? And you'll be surprised to know that, most founders that come in through the door for us have all the right things figured out. It is actually the smaller things where they need our help. And hence, we're one of the very few funds in the country today that's built a dedicated legal arm in-house, a research arm in-house. We've built a very core finance team in-house that, helps our portfolio companies with not only their debt requirements, but also just building strong financial controls. We set up a governance functions, that work with our companies, talking about what best practices could be. Regulator is obviously around the corner for everyone. So, we kind of act as a bridge between our companies and the regulator to see how our companies, for instance, can be ahead of time. We've set up a growth and capital development function. We realize fundraising is a very, very lonely journey for a founder. And we thought, why can't we support this? Why can't we be a friend in the journey? Why can't we be a value editor or, create some sort of a value in that journey? So those are, just example of some of the things that, we've set in-house in addition to like a Marcom facility or a platforms function that's actually going around globally today to see, what sort of global partnerships can our portfolio companies be exposed to. And, this is one core that we continue to be obsessed with.
So I've just got a follow-up question on that. Once a company is growing the right way and the cash flows become predictable, how soon do you introduce debt compared to equity at that point in time?
Yeah, no. And, that's a very fair question to ask. And in all honesty, there's no right answer to this. We've had companies that have unlocked debt at, let's say, a very small scale of 10 crores. And we've had companies that, scale to about 200 crores before they've had to look at debt. I think it's, a function, and, it comes down to what you're raising the debt for and what can it solve for you. And so a lot of times that's a function of the sector. And in a lot of cases, where we've seen that companies have been very proactively been able to manage their capital allocations across equity and debt to manage their cash flows. But as a rule of thumb, we're always advising our companies to have some sort of a leverage built into the business early on. What that does for a lot of these startups is to have an early discipline built out, early relationships built out, right? To unlock debt, like a larger portion of debt, because equity cannot keep funding the business growth. At some point in time, you need a healthy a healthy sort of a discipline built in between debt and equity. So once a certain discipline is built in, a certain governance is built in, we do advise our companies to look at debt, because we feel that it further enhances discipline in a company to grow at a much larger scale and have those relationships that go beyond a few years and unlock a lot more capital and reduce dependence on equity over a period of time to sustain growth.
Thanks. Anyone else? Sure.
Hi, this is Krishnan. I'm from Bizlaw. We are a reverse logistic company, altogether different. We are not a D2C or something like that. We're a tech-based reverse logistic. One is building brand, what you say. And how do you give some weightage for brands while investing money into the company? Early startup or a Series A funding or a pre-series, what kind of weightage you give for it? What kind of valuations you do? Because if you see there's no formal way of valuing the brand. Like you said, Netcore, I think you work with a lot of brands and all that. So we normally, what we have done is, we are not invested much on the brand, but we are just done a registration of our brand. Then we keep doing a lot of posts in the LinkedIn, or it can be on Facebook, and we participate in some events and all that. Beyond that, we don't invest much on the brands. Yes, we do have a brochure and all that. But I'd say it's a good point that long term, yes, we need to invest in brand. That's where the new customers you're able to acquire. Being a logistic company, everybody needs me. Any company you talk is starting from an apparel company or starting from an electronic company or a lab equipment company needs us. So how do you do that? How do you look at when you invest? Do you give some weightage for brands when you make some investments into the companies?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're saying that for a logistics brand, do we give weightage to the kind of brands that work with you when we look at? Got it. No, it's so honestly in logistics, and again, we've been, and again our team's forming a view on it, but a lot of people have branded us as contrarian investors, and our view has always been that we look beyond your deck, and and whether it's D2C or any other business, we're very supply chain oriented because we feel that's a mode that lasts. So for us, if you look at any logistics company or any distribution company that we've come in, we've actually gone ahead and invested in infrastructure. We've gone ahead and invested in building capability and capacity. So for us, yes, of course, if you have logos, that's great. We feel it's such a massive industry, demand will follow irrespective. It's a supply-oriented problem that one needs to solve for, and hence, for us as investors, the learning has been that find companies, associate valuation as a function of the heft that's been built in that and an engine that scales over a period of time, as opposed to just the order book that you have or the clients that you have, because irrespective of what a brand commands from you, I think your potential is a lot much larger too, as you just described to us. And when you look at that in terms of metrics, what that's going to translate into is, how deep is your network, how quick is your network, what is the efficiency cycles associated with your business, both across, your P&L and your delivery times. And those are the things that, we would kind of look for.
So Aditya, since you're talking more closer towards maturity, wanted to know, while you're getting towards that stage, how do you basically look or channelize capital allocation, be it equity, debt? Leave the take to you as to how you can actually differentiate the both, and you can say give which product or entity more weightage.
See, I think debt is super critical, but usually a lot of the investments into whether it's brand building, infrastructure, all of this actually happens because you have to invest before time. And that sort of capital need not come from debt because the business is not at that scale, and hence it's essential that some of the capital that you're looking to invest largely, and more so often, if you have that capital, great, but if that doesn't happen, then equity works better. And for some of these bets. But I think from a day-to-day perspective, if you're selling a product or selling a service, the working capital requirement is better serviced through debt. And I think it's a waste of equity if you really invest that into your inventory, and especially for us, right? Like you are optimizing on your inventory, but you still need to keep at least a certain days of coverage to ensure that you're never out of stock for your clients. So largely our perspective is, and we've been there where we've invested a lot of equity capital into for our working capital cycle, and I think that's been very detrimental towards the kind of dilution that we would see as a founder. I think it's smarter to also raise capital when you don't need it so that you can invest in things that are more futuristic. And from a day-to-day function, I think debt is the, and there are multiple ways of debt, right? Like there's venture debt, there is supply chain financing, which is extremely crucial for brands like us. There's revenue financing. So I'm of a strong opinion that anything that needs and has a more recurring cycle use debt, but anything that's invested ahead of time, equity plays a better role in terms of risk management. Obviously, there are funds, obviously, there are brands or companies that have invested into that infrastructure using debt, and that's the kind of risk appetite they share. But for a lot many folks, while that might not be possible, even the access to capital might not be there. I think then equity becomes a safer option.
So what would be the metrics typically you're looking for over here then?
I think it's difficult to say because there is no set formula. But I mean, especially for us, initially it was probably 90% equity, 10% debt, or I would say 100% equity and no debt at all. To today, at least, it being almost at the range of 50-50 because the kind of money also you'll invest in the infrastructure activities will somewhere reflect the kind of growth you're looking forward to, and hence once that growth comes, you'll need that debt to then service those cycles. So I think it's a bit of a catch-up where you invest first in equity and then you raise your debt levels to a level where it complements and augments the kind of capital you've already raised.
So Nanda, how you can say integrated or close it would be at that point in time while a company is growing for technology to be part of that infrastructure, for the company to come out more vibrant and more developed out over there?
Actually, maybe to add on to that, I just want to have, in terms of the capital allocation, let's say between 0 to 1 and 1 to 10, right? Like within marketing, how do you think about allocating the capital for, let's say, brand building versus channel optimization versus cross-sell, upsell? At what point do you think, there is a substantial shift in terms of like, how do you look at allocating capital for probably advertisement versus brands versus customer engagements, right? Like, just curious. I think that will actually drive me because that's exactly what we work with brands. These metrics are very different for the type of brands that we work with, and it's also dependent on the priorities they have, and at the same time the growth with which they want to grow. Bootstrap brand would want to focus a lot on the profitable growth. On the contrary, some brands are looking to capitalize on the growth only, right? And which is where they want to just double down on their brand and get more cash flow. So just curious to know, how do you think about it?
Like rightly said, see, I think it would depend, it would differ from brand to brand, bootstrap versus, let's say, funded. For a bootstrap brand, honestly, everything goes to performance, right? My 9.5, 10 years of building Joker, in which we have done everything performance, bottom-up approach. You don't have a option to run your business top-down, right? You rather run it bottom-up, and brand becomes a residue of, and that's what exactly brand is. It's a sum totality of what all of us experience about each and every element about the company, right from the logo to the messaging to each and everything, product, price, everything put together, right? So I personally would put all my 100% in marketing, in performance, which I still do. I feel for fashion and lifestyle brands, even let's say, the beauty category, Instagram, YouTube, there are platforms where you can create stunning content, which is free. Figure out and augment that with paid performance marketing to create a peripheral layer of audience which goes and sticks around that content, and then drive content, community, and then drive meaningful commerce around that community. So I think that's what we do to stay really profitable, very healthy EBITDA, so that you don't look at P&L. You look at first cash flow, balance sheet, and then you talk about P&L. So that's the approach, I think, what we have had from a bootstrap point of view.
See, I think what he said was, it's 100% true, right? Like initially you're just focused on ki dhanda kahan se aa raha hai, and that usually happens with performance marketing largely. But I think eventually we all realize that the funnel for the performance marketing and to convert that user becomes increasingly more expensive, and hence to add a wider pool of people who already know you, know your service or know your product. Uh, he mentioned some of the things like content, community. I think those all are a part of the brand building aspect. Until you don't do that, it's impossible to really even touch or have a high beta level, because if you don't consistently keep reinvesting marketing monies into not just performance but also a large part of uh, touching a consumer's life in every different way, and what aligns with your brand strategy or your business strategy, I don't think uh, performance is almost becomes a very expensive zero-sum game where you eventually keep trying to retain the same customer and you keep trying to target the same cohort of people, not really focusing a lot on building a larger pool of people to target. So to Nanda's question, I think it's more around uh, investing a large part. For us, I think it's almost because we are a home care brand. Uh, most people are brand agnostic as well. To think of it, which tissue paper I'm using or which laundry detergent I'm using. But if you would see actually people today, if you change any of your, maybe not for the tissue papers, but your laundry detergent, your dishwashing liquids, either your house help or whoever's, engaged with that activity are extremely brand conscious. So in terms of touch, feel and all of that. So it's important that you do some of those activities in a meaningful way to actually build enough trials or enough, and not enough purchases, because I think the purchases are more of a resultant of people knowing you and knowing what your product or your service does. So, I mean, I think that my 2 bits on brand building versus performance.
Yeah, maybe actually this was very interesting. Some of the things that came up very repetitively as we've seen community, branding, growing with your existing users, right? Because, and let's just be honest, I mean, like Google or Facebook, they want you to spend more on their platforms, right? And which is where there is a saturation point, right? And not all brands can afford to have that budgets to be allocated. So which is where we've recently onboarded brands like Fab India and Hosey Hair Forest Essentials. And if you look at what they are trying to solve is to, because they have a large component of offline, online bringing together. Now it's about how do you marry the data, right? Like how do you get the intelligence in a single platform? That way you get to be in front of your user, and you get to actually capture the right intents of the user, whether or not they are purchasing offline or online. And that way you can go back to your users, to the channel at the time, where they need to see your content, right? Like, so we've been working with some of the brands with the options of geofencing as well, where you can actually get to know if a user is within a specific vicinity of a location, and then get to send the SMS or targeted communications across wherever they are more likely to see your message. So that's where we get integrated very deeply with the brands to solve for these omni-channel communication use cases. That way we can actually optimize the costs for the brands.
Actually, thank you very much for your time. Because I'm already getting stares over there from Aditya, like, though we started at IST, we need to end at the usual. Yeah, everyone is waiting actually for some food also. So on that note, Vishaka, all over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for taking out the time. It was lovely having all of you.